inside, running good to the 40, breaks it to the 50, takes to the 40, takes to the 30, to the 20, to the 10, to the...
Today we're back with a collaboration of One More Down and Once a Cowboy, Always a Cowboy. We have the great pleasure to have one of the most influential men that I've ever crossed paths with, my high school coach, Ron Berdis. And we're going to discuss the influence of his father, Steve Berdis, who was a great Chaney player in his own right, one of the early pioneers of the City Series, and one of the first recognized All-Ohio guys to come out of Chaney. So it's a pleasure to have you on, Coach. It's always good to get to spend a little time with you. Try to always share my appreciation and my regards to you anytime I get the chance to see you. So to have you on and do this with us, I'm very appreciative, and I thank you for taking the time to consider it.
Well, you're a special guy to me, and I very happy to be here, and I appreciate the invite.
So as we typically start out with our segments, I think the first half of this will focus on that story about who your dad was as a player, what his influence was to you being your father. And, I was fortunate enough to be able to observe some of the relationship between the two of you during my time under you as a player. So if you could you kind of give us some background about your dad's origins and his rise as a player coming through Youngstown?
Sure. My earliest memories of my dad and football are as very small kids. All the neighborhood kids would gather on the street. And when my dad would come home from work, from the mill, he would go to the top of our driveway and punt the football over the house. We had a big 2-story house that sat kind of up on a hill, and we'd sit in the street, and I was kind of a tag along at that point, and field the punt, and that was kind of my first exposure to football. Then I could recall as a first grader him buying me a little uniform, and you got to understand that crossing Steel Street and then walking on Upper Butler, we called it, there was a field, and the field is where Holy Name would practice football. And, I'd walk up there and sit on the dummies, and they kind of I was probably considered a mascot, but they kind of accepted me as part of the team. So I would go to the games and everything, and thinking that, I was one of the team guys. But, the fact that my uniform was a little bit different than everybody else's didn't really matter to me, because I was on the team, and to be honest, I would tell everybody that I started playing football in first grade, and which is not a lie. It wasn't organized per se. I spend more time probably just playing on the dummies than actually being a part of the team. But Yeah, that's the first recollection. And my dad would, as I said earlier, punting the football over the house, and then he'd come home from work and say, "Let's go in the backyard." And he, beyond throwing the football, he'd have me do fumble recovery drills. He'd throw the ball and teach me how to scoop it and end up on my feet and move on. And it was things like that. And as the years progressed and I became more and more involved in grade school football, he, the story started to unfold about the legendary status, and that's what it was. I mean, he there, as I told you earlier, there wasn't a person that I would come in contact that was familiar with his exploits that wouldn't go on and on about. And the line was the same. It was always, if you're half as good a player as your father was, you'll be a great player. And I don't know that I ever, from obviously never seeing him play, but hearing the stories and reading about all of the things that he accomplished was certainly something to chase. And I to this day I couldn't be prouder to be his son. It was he was a Chaney legend, if you will.
So, just to give the viewers some perspective and reference to the time period that we would be referring to. So, Chaney is a high school at that time. It is in what was the old West Elementary School. And we're talking about the mid 20s, where the City Series as a conference is maybe a couple years old. I believe they began playing in earnest in 1927. Prior to that, you had South and ran as the beacon schools for the entire city. You have the legendary Chess McPhee as that first coach. I believe he was a player at Rand in his day, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so we're talking about a time period where you don't have two platoon football. Two platoon football doesn't become popularized until the war years. So when we talk about what high school football and college football is in the 1920s, you have to consider that the guys that are listed as starters, they have to go both ways. They have to play all special teams. And the only way that you could come out of the game was if you're injured or if you're subbed for. And if that happens, you don't get to enter the game until the following quarter. So when we look at what it would take to play offense and defense, all special teams without ever coming off the field unless you're hurt or unless someone is coming in for you to spell you for the rest of the quarter, you have to give a lot of consideration and respect and reverence to guys who could play a full game that long, and some guys never ever come off the field from start to finish. So when you go back in the annals and you read articles in the Vindicator, you start to see your dad's name appear in parts in the 1928 season. He's being considered early on in the preseason. There's a quote from Coach McPhee that he's looking at Berdis is how he's referred to in the paper as an end or possibly a halfback. And then you fast forward an additional year into 1929, and he just takes the city by storm. He's leading and battling for the scoring title in the city, well, in the whole area, really, because at that time they're not just taking the statistics of what is South Rand and Chaney, and they're comparing his scoring feats to everybody who's in this region. And when you consider the amount of touchdowns that he's piling up, and he's playing, offense, defense, special teams, if you could put that into the modern era, he'd probably be a guy who's in those high 20s, high 30s, with the way that the modern game allows you to sub and get rest and enter and specialize. So, um, do you have any knowledge or any stories that you can relate to some of his exploits and some of the great games that you heard about?
Well, actually, I was able to. Coach McPhee was the director for Bort's Pool um, uh, in his retirement, and when I would go there as a young boy, um, he would tell me a lot of stories. He would tell me stories of. He would have to have my dad um stay at his house the night before a game be, to keep the girls away from him. And he said, he was telling me, he said they'd throw rocks at the window, uh, pebbles at the window to get his attention, thinking, that he might come out. But uh, uh, and yeah, so to keep him uh, under wraps, so to speak, he would have him. And Mrs. McPhee, I don't know if when you were playing, I used to invite her to the games. Or to the banquets. I don't know if you remember that,
Yes.
but what a woman she was. But she would also tell me stories. But in relation to uh, game stories, obviously my dad would never say, well, I did this or I did that or I had this many touchdowns. But some of the things that were told to me or that I read about um, is where he would just take over a game. And the one big, there was another great back, Vince, I want to say his name was Ferrara or something from Rayan at the time, and that was a big head-to-head match that they had. And um, there's actually a picture in the one book that we have that of them shaking hands and getting quotes from each one of their mothers. Um, and uh, my my dad really had a big game there, and they were able to beat Rayan in that contest. And Coach McPhee told me a story of my dad's leg was injured and came out, and they were losing a game, and I don't even remember what game it was. And at halftime, he just had his uh, pullover on and threw it off, threw the crutches away, and kind of almost like a legend story type thing. But he swore that was the truth and came and scored the winning touchdown in the second half of a game that was really closely fought. But yeah, as I said, my dad wouldn't. That's the kind of guy he was. He just, as great as he was as far as an athlete, he and the kids, the five kids that he had, any trophies or pictures, we would play with them and ended up ruining them all. I mean, from batting titles to most valuable player trophies to whatnot. But um, there's many stories out there as far as um, him at Chaney, and then he went on to continue after Chaney played semi-pro for the North. It was called the North Side Inn, and they played in Canton and whatnot. And that was that was during the fall, and during the summer he was playing in the Slovak Baseball League, which was kind of almost like a minor league type team. They would play at Idora Park and Bortz, and the stories were told to me that he'd be out at Lake Milton in between shifts on his days off, and on Sundays they would bring him in a car, and the fence along Oakwood would be lined with people chanting his name for him to get out of the car, put his baseball uniform on, come and hit a couple home runs at Vorts in baseball, and then go back out the lake and recreate. So yeah, and speaking of, I mentioned Lake Milton. When I was a young kid, we'd go out to, whether it was fishing or golfing, and everybody in that area would talk about Steve Berdis as far as his athletic prowess was concerned.
Now, does he ever mention what draws him to athletics in the first place?
He did. We talked one time, and he told me how influential Coach McPhee was in pulling him out. He was real close to his mom. His mom was part of the house was a storefront and later converted into a garage, but it was a wallpaper store. She was a wallpaper hanger, and she pushed him in the arm reach of Coach McPhee, and he was instrumental. And at that time, he was probably coaching every sport, and
Yes.
and he got him involved in that. And my dad was forever grateful for that.
Now, part of the way that is structured in the newspaper, and I don't know if my theory is correct, but it seems that during that time, coaches had to declare what their lineup was prior to the game. So as you're reading the matchups for the upcoming weeks, they always kind of give you a report of who's injured, who's not available to play, who the starting backfield is going to be. And I don't know if that was a strategy thing, just a way of passing information to generate interest in these games, or if it may have been, part of a betting line around the area, which, wouldn't be too far fetched, but you just see the way that they refer to your dad in those upcoming weeks during that senior year, because I believe they finished 9-0-2 in 29 to become the first undefeated team in Chaney history.
Yeah, correct. 1929. I still have the gold football that they gave to the players. Red C on it, 1929, undefeated. And what amazed me as I got older was the teams that they played. I think they played Erie Cathedral Prep and Steubenville, and the traveling that was involved playing some of these teams, whether it was Chaney going there or them coming here. I don't know how
Travel
many.
wasn't easy at that point in time.
Yeah, I wouldn't think. So yeah, but that was the first undefeated team, and he was really, really, of all the trophies and plaques and whatnot, that 29 year, that undefeated first undefeated season, I think was one of the tallest feathers in his cap.
Now, after he graduates from Chaney, which would have been 1930,
Yes.
does he go directly into the workforce, or does he take time in his youth to have different experiences?
Well, he was playing baseball and professional football, and then he went right into the mill after graduation. He started in the mill, and but like I said, was playing for the North Side Inn. That was semi-pro. What they were, I'm sure they weren't making but peanuts doing that. And I don't know if they paid in the Slovak League or not. I'm going to guess not. But he eventually got into the bar business. He bought a bar while he was still working in the mill, and on the west side, not far from where we grew up, there was Berdis's bar, and he had a business where all the athletes would come after the games. I mean, it was a pretty big deal. But from high school, semi-pro football, Slovak League baseball, and working in the mill.
Did you see him play at all? Like, was there a time where, when you were young and he was still going?
He would have. He was no. Both of his knees were shot, and he had a number of operations on both knees. And as like maybe a 9-year-old, he would limp race us up the block and always win. But it became like a real liability for him. I mean, he really struggled until heck into his 60s, late 60s, that he had both knees replaced. But
now, with him coming out of high school, one of the things that I wanted to know about, if with the stock market crash happening in 1929, but we surmise that the mills are still going in Youngstown and still producing. Is he shielded from that effect, or does that impact him and shape him in the way that he lives his life and he essentially raises you?
Yeah, I think he was pretty much was shielded from it. I think he was fortunate enough to have a good paying job at that time, even though the economy was bottoming out. He was able to bring 5 kids into the world, and certainly along with my mother, and she worked. So between the two of them, when she was able, she was working, and the grandparents were there to help raise the kids, and when the parents were working. So yeah, I don't recall. Now, my oldest sister might recall some of the effects of the Depression, but and economic times. But I was born in '52, so it was after the Second World War, and it was times were good.
Baby boomer in the truest sense of the word, huh?
Truest sense, yes, yes, yeah. I don't recall us, wanting for anything, as growing up.
When you were at what point did you realize? So you hear these stories about your dad, and we've never really talked about this, but like, when did it turn into a realization? Like, you know what, he was legit. Like he was, because everybody looks at their dad as their dad, and everybody's dad is kind of, larger than life. But then you're like, wow, you know what? He was.
I think when I started to play, when I started to be in a position to compete and realize, what the game involved, and hearing how great he was at it,
Yeah.
and then aspiring uh, to reach out and chase that image that was, that he created.
Yeah. You mentioned at one point that, and so one of the unique things about Chaney is the pictures on the wall, and we had talked previously on the Cowboy podcast about at West there were other pictures that maybe weren't brought up to Chaney, and you said you thought that Coach McPhee said there was one of your dad as well. When you were there going there, did you see any of those?
No,
Okay.
I didn't. Coach McPhee was in his last year.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, my ninth grade year at West, he ended up retiring like mid-year.
Okay.
So I had him for a while, and I'd get a
Right.
plus the quarterback on his team, Nick Hayden, on that 29 team, was a teacher at West at the time.
Okay.
And he relayed a lot of the stories, as well as, like I said, every neighbor that followed football would offer this, the same type of information, if you will.
Yeah. Hey, Ron, when you would go back and look at some of those articles, one of the things that I noticed, they'd always have the attendance, and sometimes it's 5,000, 6,000, 10,000, depending on the game. Did you notice any of those numbers as you were kind of going through?
Yes. Anytime. Well, one of the things that stood out was location. So sometimes you see the venues changing depending on who the matchups are and who has the run of those two stadiums. So you see some games being played at Rand, some at South, and those tend to be anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 on a regular occurrence. But then there's some games that are shifted out to Camel to play if you may have a Rand playing at Rand and then South playing at South, and that third school out may have to shift out over and play a game at Camel, or wait till the following day to have the use of one of those stadiums. But it does seem like it was the thing to do on a Saturday evening was to check out local high school football, because that seemed to be the day that they reserved for the premier matchup for the week, with the other schools playing on a Friday evening.
There was a stadium at West at the old Chaney. As a matter of fact, we talked about that there was still there was a wall up before they tore the school down. There was a wall remaining, but my dad and Chess would tell me, and I think if you look at the original articles of them building the building, that was the first Chaney. they talk in terms of a stadium and how many games they played, if any. Maybe it was used for scrimmages or
Yeah.
whatnot. I don't know. Maybe it never got to the status that they wanted. And when they moved down to the schools that we went to,
Yeah.
731, there was plans for a stadium where they had a drive and raised money, and there was a question about what happened to the money that they raised.
Wow.
That became kind of uh, a quandary as far as because they had a list of donors and what they donated and
Was this
everything.
early on when they built it, or
This was, yeah, I think in like the early 50s.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Now, do you know if those early teams were they referred to as the Cowboys back then, or did they have another moniker?
Didn't we look into that?
I
I'm
don't.
pretty sure they were the Cowboys. The articles that from Gene's book, the Janeco's book, is they're 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 referred to as the Cowboys.
Yeah, I think when they have when they first started, when they built the school, some of the first Vindicator articles in like 26, it talks about Youngstown West. And then there's a different, sometimes it's called Chaney, it's called Youngstown West, because you got East, North, South, and then the Ray in school. So that was one difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the information on the Cheney thing was that I found was originally that site was Cleveland Elementary School before it became West.
Oh, if that's the case, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the apparently the original intent was because Cheney and East are being built at the same time. So the original intent was for there to be Rand, South, East, and West High School, and then the namesake Cheney passed away in 1925, and they decided that year that the school was opening in 26 to rename it as Cheney, NH Cheney, and
Oh,
that's how it became
I
Cheney
got you.
High School. Yeah.
Huh.
So,
Yeah, I didn't know that.
so as your dad matures, do you ever feel any pressure from his end to be a high level player, or uh, does he take that hands off approach in terms of letting you find your own way?
Yeah, I think that it was, you figure this out. Um, he worked with me. I mean, he supported whatever I went into. He was okay with. I never played little league and the reason for that was because I always played at the playground and it seemed like that's where our neighborhood kids gravitated to. There weren't many, although my brother did play little league, but I just I don't know. I I was okay in baseball and but in any event, like I said, there were times when he wasn't able to come to games because of working turns. But if he wasn't there with my mother would come herself, um, and but always supported. And as far as chasing that legendary status, like I said, I was proud to be his son, and maybe subconsciously I realized, man, or thought that I could never get there. just happy to be mentioned in the same sentence.
Yeah, I think I share a similar lane with you in that regard. It, my dad's shadow is very long as well in terms of basketball and baseball. But for me, I just always loved football because it was what was going on for my little section of Youngstown. And then I think you're right. When you have that figure and that legend in front of you, I think in the back of your mind there is that, well, can I be that good or can I reach those heights? So you try to, the father spites the son, to prove that he can do it on his own. So I think sometimes you go in that opposite direction just to avoid that comparison and some of that criticism and uh, fear of failure or not carrying on the legacy and the name. I see it in my own sons. They don't play anything that I play.
Yeah. And my son, played basketball and as far as football, he came to me as a 9 or 10-year-old and said, I want to try football. And I said, those are the words I've been waiting to hear. And I took him up and he mixed it up. It wasn't the greatest situation in the world. I mean, but he was well received and everything. And he came to me after a couple of days and said, I don't think this is for me. I said, that's your call entirely. You go and thank the coach, shake his hand, and thanks for his time, and tell him what you told me. And he did. And I can recall as a junior in high school, at the beginning of my junior year in football, and I was into it. But sophomore, I get not enough to letter, but just happy to be on the team. And then my junior year, for the first game, me and another kid were alternating at guard, at left guard, the weak side guard and unbalanced. And the offensive line coach, who was John Pelusi at the time, said, "Hey, we flipped a coin and he's getting the other guy's getting the start." And I remember coming home and telling my mom and dad, I don't think I'm going to play anymore. And they neither one of them blinked. They said, if that's what you decide, that's what you decide. But you're going to live with that decision, and you're going to go and thank the coaches. But think about it. And I did, and I thought about it, and I didn't. And, I ended up starting the next game, and unfortunately I broke my arm right after that and missed the rest of the season. But, they, in answer to your question, there was no pressure. Well, you're going to hang in there and you're going to play. I mean, it was, you think they put it on me and well, they handled it the way I think they should have. And it certainly worked out.
So can we start shifting into, that Chaney experience for you? Because, I kind of would like to have a perspective of, what football looks like in the 60s for a high school kid in Youngstown, because certainly your youth and your high school experience coming through Youngstown looks different than what it would have been for a person like me coming through in the 90s, because there's just so many more people in the city at that time. And then the layout of what is your feeder school, and you pretty much are locked into. If you're a West Side guy, you may lose some to Ursuline, but Chaney is it, and the city is it at that time. So
Yeah,
when I'm sorry, when do you enter Chaney? What year is that?
that would have been 67.
Okay, and so what's happening in City Series football in 1967 as you're coming into high school?
Okay, coming out of 8th grade, coming out of Holy Name, um, uh, we uh, we had a really good 8th grade year, and then 9th grade at West was just so. But the kids were divided then. Half of the kids would go to Volney, and half of the kids would go to West. Um, and Volney didn't have football at the time, so Red would use those football guys coming out of grade school as managers, just to keep them involved. And at West, we had a team, but it wasn't a very good experience as far as wins and losses were concerned. I mean, it just wasn't. But Chaney was the king then. I mean, 66 was their undefeated year, Red's undefeated year, and 67 they had great aspirations. And you got Dave Brungard and Mike Dinero. You got some really great Hall of Fame names that are playing during that time. And you got to understand that as my three sisters all went to Ursuline,
Mm-hmm.
uh, coming out of Holy Name. And Ursuline's scenario at the time was coach would come to 8th grade football, uh, uh, have a meeting with the football players and say, you can come to Ursuline for free. And as I told Dallas, um, that was never an option. And my mother wanted me to go to Ursuline in the worst way. And I told her, I begged, and my dad kind of stayed out of it. And you know, obviously that was the reason. I mean, my dad was a great Chaney player, and I want to follow that, and going to the games and whatnot. So it was Chaney all the way, and that sophomore year, again, I was received as, Red knew who my dad was. Red knew all about my dad, um, and would make reference the 90 guys that were on the team. You know, this is Steve Berdis' son, and he's going to be a great player here. Uh, so that,
Put the time.
yeah, I could be. This is a true story. I can remember getting thrown in with like the first gang during doubles, and I was probably rattling in my cleats
As a sophomore.
yeah. But not during a game or anything. Like during double sessions.
Yeah, right.
And maybe it was just Red's way of saying, let me see what kind of metal this kid has. Let's see what he comes from good stock. Let's see if he can be ready early. And I think he found out right away that I was still wet behind the ears. No expectations. In sophomore year, you were, as a sophomore at that time at Chaney, you were happy to make the traveling team, to be able to dress for the games, because not everybody that was on the team would dress. So if you dressed, that was something. And like at that time, I can't remember any sophomores that were lettering.
You think about that. That's a complete divergent, right? So, not number one, you didn't go to quote unquote high school until your sophomore year,
Yes.
right? And even then, Ron, and I don't know how it was for you guys, but for me, it was a situation where, like you're saying, as a sophomore, you're really not getting time. Now if guys aren't getting special team time as freshmen, or guys aren't getting a little bit of a look as freshmen or sophomores, they're ready to be done, and
You got to understand that there were guys on the team at that time that, because there were so many, Red would say, "You guys go over the hill and just down from the lower field where the actual goalposts were."
Mhm.
But that there were no goal. That wasn't a field. That was just an area.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was nothing marked off or anything. There was no goalposts. He'd say, "You go down over the hill and time up on your own." There were 3 coaches. I mean, it wasn't like there was somebody that can go and
3 coaches in total.
in other words, get out of our hair here and time up and be happy that I gave you a helmet and shoulder pads, and that's certainly no disrespect to Red and how he ran the program, but it was out of necessity.
Yeah.
In the very fact that he kept the kids, didn't cut anybody, kept.
Was that a thing back then? Would teams cut if they didn't have equipment? I would assume.
Yeah. I think for the most part, kids would cut themselves when we don't have a helmet for you, son. Okay, but you could still practice.
Now, during that time, is Fitch out Mahoning Avenue during your years at Chaney?
My senior year, we dedicated the new stadium. My senior year in '69, that was the first game played in Fitch Stadium, the new stadium.
So where are you guys? Where does Chaney and Fitch do battle prior to the new stadium being built?
Well, they played, in '69 was the first time in I want to say close to 20 years that they start playing again. So, and even in '69, as far as we were still thought we were going to be able, they were constructing, and we would go on a summer night and sit on our car. They're in the middle of the construction site and look out over the stadium and say, "We're going to be playing here, hopefully in a couple of weeks," but it was still up until a week before game time, thought that we were going to play in the old stadium on Mahoning Avenue. And the bleachers weren't completed on the one side, on the home side. And it was still under construction, but we played the game, and unfortunately that wasn't a great start to senior year. Our senior year, we lost 14-0. They had a great back in Cooch Manor, and we were 0-1. And second game we played Camel, and we lost 13-7. We were 0-2, and I remember Red cutting my tape off after the game, and telling Red that we let him down and everything. Anyway, we were 2 platooning at the time, and he just scrapped it. He just said, "I'm going to start playing my best 11," and we did, and we won the next 8.
So who's the natural rival for Chaney at that time, since this Austintown Chaney series had been interrupted. Was Campbell more of a rival then, or Ursuline more of a rival then?
Camel was we weren't playing Ursuline.
No.
They stopped playing Ursuline, I think, in 60,
We talked about this because
67 maybe.
yeah, Ursula
My-
left for the
Yeah, we didn't.
for the SVC.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that would have been like 66, 67. I don't know if they would have. Yeah, because I think in 66 when they were undefeated, I don't think Ursuline was one of their wins. We kept Mooney, but not Ursuline. And I'd say my senior year, there was a thing called, to fill schedule, called Shaughnessy Playoff. They had a Shaughnessy Playoff. So how you finished in the league, one would play four. The last two games of the year, one would play four and two would play three. So we played North in the first round of the Shaughnessy playoff, and South played, I want to say, Ran. And then we played South for the city championship. Now we played them in the regular season and beat them 19-18. And that's a whole story in itself. But they had a great football team. They were certainly the best team on our schedule that year. They had the name Tony Bell.
Yes.
They had, who was phenomenal athlete. Just had a great career at Bowling Green and got drafted. Played in an All-Star game, and then tragically passed way too early. Had cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, or cerebral palsy. I actually worked with him for a year, but a great guy, great player, and like I said, we won 19-18 in the first game, and Tony Bell really hurt us. I mean, we were one play away from losing that game. So Red decided to put me on his nose as an inside linebacker, move me out, and disrupt his route. And needless to say, I was throwing forearms at air because he was just running past me. I mean, it ended up messing with their timing because they ended up moving him into the backfield during the middle of the game to try to utilize him because they couldn't get him the ball out there. We ended up rolling him. We beat him like 45-12 or something like that. But and that was for the city championship.
So who are some of the other standout guys during your era that you recall as being big name players, or people that you certainly thought had a lot of potential, or guys that you may have respected from going head to head with them?
I know South, as I said, they had Tony Arthur Grant. They had Abe Welcher. Those Jim Carney was their center. Those are names that stand out at South. The toughest football player that I played against personally, that I thought was just an outstanding linebacker and guard, was James Friendly from North. Went to Hiram, but just a tough. He was as good a football player as he passed away early too, and I sent something to the family. I was still coaching at the time, and told him I just want you to know that he was the best football player that I lined up against. And yeah, he was a great one. Mike Williams at North.
Was
Rich
Richard Beverly the quarterback at North during your time?
He was. He was. Rich Beverly was a great player. Rich Cherno at Wilson and Dave Toth, Woody Booth, Roland Smith. Roland Smith played at Wilson then, and Eugene Teague at Rayan, Nazi Bana at Rayan.
Did you have to block Mervyn Teague from East during that time?
I can. When I was a junior, my first start was against East, and I recall Mervyn then. They had somebody else too, but I recall Mervyn then, and that first start, I lined up next to Jim O'Malley, who was a great player for Chaney, went on to Notre Dame and played for the Broncos for 7 years. But a fumble popped into my hand and an interception popped into my hand. And again, that was the first start. And my dad was working the shift, and he couldn't come. My mom was there, and I remember after the game and saying, I wish Dad would have been able here to see that. But yeah, Mervyn Teague was he was a good one. There was a lot of talent in the city, and that was a pretty unique deal that Shaughnessy playoff. That was that was great atmosphere.
Now, how often that was obviously before the playoffs. I think playoffs started in what 70. Okay, I was going to say 74. Yeah. So was that all the time? Did you guys do that?
That was a one and done. That was a 1 year deal.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The year before, how they extended the season, they had an all-star game.
Okay.
And I was that's when I broke my arm and I missed the second half of the season. But Chaney they practiced at Chaney and ended up having an all-star game at I want to say it was at South, and they had like a North versus a South and played a game, and that was a 1 year deal.
When you, I know we've talked about it a couple times, but never really in depth. The preview concept. What can you talk a little bit about that preview concept? So instead of scrimmages like that, you would have like a little preview, a quarter preview or something.
Yeah, I don't think it completely replaced scrimmages. I think it evolved into that last scrimmage that's kind of like game conditions.
Yeah, the showcase. Yeah. What they call now.
And that's what it was. You played. I'm pretty sure you in the league. It was when I was in ninth grade. Okay. So I never experienced that as a player. But it was you play two different teams, a half with one team and then a half with another team.
Within the city, it was an inner city.
Yeah. And it showcased, all the teams. So that would have been pretty neat to see, to go to.
Yeah, definitely.